So it's June 13th, 2019. I'm going to call this Lacey City Council meeting to order. If you're able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So before we go to the approval of the agenda and consent agenda items, I just want to do a point of order. We obviously have a lot of people here who are interested in our ordinance, our camping ordinance, and so how we normally do the process, during public comment, it's public comment on items not on the agenda. We will still have that on this agenda for items not on the agenda. Once we get to the ordinance, we'll hear a presentation of the ordinance, so you'll be able to hear the ordinance, how it's written, and our city attorney is going to give some feedback about that. Our chief of police is going to talk about that. And then once we get to that ordinance, if you have specific questions about the ordinance, you can come and give comments or ask questions specifically about the ordinance at that time. So hopefully everyone understands that. So for items not on the agenda, if you have something else besides the camping ordinance, that will be normal. And then if you have specific questions about the ordinance, we'll allow it at that time before a vote is taken. And also, given the fact, I would move that we move our ordinances up to item number 7 and move everything else down. So ordinance is the first thing on our agenda.
So is that
first
so
major item?
Are you moving to approve the agenda with that change?
Yeah, with that change.
So I would second that motion.
Clarification?
Sure.
Will you be also moving item B ahead of item A under ordinances?
No, actually, we'll go through the affordable housing fee waiver first, but I'm just going to move everything, that ordinances first.
So 10 would become 7, and 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, we'll go in order after that. Is everyone okay for that? Yeah. So it's been moved and seconded to amend the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. We have an amended agenda. And so first up on our amended agenda is public comment. So if you have anyone wishing to address this council on any items not on the agenda, now is your time to come and talk. Is there anyone? Sir?
No cup holder?
So please state your full name and keep your comments about 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening for allowing me the opportunity to address the mayor and the city council. My name is Harold Jones, and for the record, I spell Harold H-A-R-A-L-D. I'm here to discuss the removal of the swim dock at the Long Lake Park. This dock has served Lacey residents for many years, both in the winter and the summer months. The Parks Department has spent approximately $50,000 to hire a consultant to tell us that diving off the dock is not safe due to underwater hazards. It was claimed that there are logs and other underwater debris that are a safety hazard for people diving off the dock, even though the dock is clearly marked that diving is not permitted and is supervised by lifeguards. From what the Olympian newspaper printed, the divers removed an anchor and blocks, and they also removed weed barrier from the lake bed. If the divers removed the underwater hazards, then why was it necessary to remove the dock? Now we have the Parks Department dipping into the taxpayers' coffers, again, spending thousands of dollars to relocate the dock to Long's Pond. The use of the dock at Long's Pond is going to be restricted to fishing for children and seniors over 70 years old. If one of them happens to accidentally fall from the dock into the pond, I doubt there will be a lifeguard on duty. Does this make sense? From a safety perspective, any more than removing the dock from Long Lake? The dock has been in use for many years and provided enjoyment for all age groups. I have been to almost every January 1st polar bear plunge where approximately 300 people jump off the dock in 3 separate shifts. I have never seen council members Cox, Hearn, is it Greenstein or Greenstein? Greenstein, Deputy Mayor Pratt, or Mayor Ryder show up to support the community at the plunge. I have, however, seen Councilmember Stedman, who I think is a pretty smart guy, he must be to be on the city council, jump off the dock on January 1st. I have also seen our former police chief, Pierpoint, who I know is a smart guy, jump off the dock. So how can the Parks Department claim that jumping off the dock is unsafe? I appreciate that the Parks Board is concerned with the safety of the citizens of Lacey. But in this instance, I think it reaches the definition of government overreach. Life is not perfect and has risk. We climb into our automobiles, never expecting to be injured or killed in an accident, but we don't ban driving because of the risks. I am disappointed the council knowingly accepted the Parks Board's action. The Parks Board should have been viewed as a staff recommendation and acted on by the council. I ask that you reconsider and replace the dock at Long Lake Park for the enjoyment of your Lacey citizens. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Is there anyone else wishing to address this council on items not on the agenda? Please. Please come and state your...
Jenny Gessler.
Yeah, please keep your comments about 3 minutes.
Need my address?
Nope.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
isn't it part of procedure to have people state which town they're from?
Yeah,
living?
if you could let me know where you're from as well, I'd appreciate it.
Lacey.
Yes. Lacey.
I've spoken here before, and I'm back again to keep my face present. I sent you all an email today, and the city manager, all of the city council, and the police chief today. But I want to paint a picture for you once again, in case you forget what goes on in Hawks Prairie. I may leave my house at 32nd and Marvin, and I may drive a mile out to I-5, and I may encounter at least 5 people of the street. My personal tolerance is becoming slim. I witnessed a camp grow on a commercial property, which I detailed in my email to you, so I won't take much of your time on that. But I watched that camp grow from one person to more and more people, from one item to having a couch delivered to them one day. I contacted the broker. It's not like I'm up here complaining and not doing something about it. That finally broke up 3 weeks later yesterday. I will let you know from another neighbor that went and spoke to a gentleman. Somebody has been living on that property for 10 months undetected. He said by himself, which is not true, because I've got pictures of the other residents and their couch being delivered. That gentleman is a veteran. He has a pension, and he does not want to live in the housing that he was in before. So he is standing out on the side of Marvin with all of his belongings. That is an example for you of the people that are choosing not to get help when it's available.
Again, this we are going to be addressing this issue later in the agenda.
And this isn't about the camping, just so you know.
Okay.
This is about the continued issue, which I believe that unless you live in some of the specific areas of Lacey, you are not seeing the way that some of us residents are, especially in Hawks Prairie, where it is becoming rampant.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else wishing to address this council on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, then we will go into our rest of our agenda. And first up is under ordinances is our affordable housing waiver fee policy update.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, before you is an ordinance that would amend LMC Section 1.20.020, which would waive certain fees. As you know, this council has tried to address the affordable housing issue for a long time, actually since 2005. And in that ordinance, currently, we have Habitat for Humanity as well as the Boys and Girls Club of Thurston County. By waiving these certain fees, that can actually provide relief for a potential residential unit up to $7,000. The proposal before you is to add CHODOs, which are community-based housing development organizations. A CHODO that is in the Thurston County area is Homes First. We are currently working on a project with Homes First to provide affordable housing opportunities to homeless teens. So the recommendation before you is to amend that ordinance to allow an additional organization called CHODOs, which provide a very specific need in the community and also meet a very specific definition under federal law.
I would move to approve the proposed updates to the LMC to include community-based housing development organizations.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I think the one discussion that we had in general government before it came to the full council is that this council has talked about extending waiving these fees for anyone who's willing to provide low-income housing in the city of Lacey. Do we know where we're at in the process of coming up with criteria on when we can extend possible waiving the fees for other groups?
That's a good question, Mayor. So that work continues. We think the private sector has a role to play in this in providing affordable housing. And if they're going to meet the goals of council, which would be provide units that would serve our low and moderate income population, we would do that. Planning Commission, planning staff have been working on the issue. There's some details to work out in terms of, what is the correct level of actually income, the average median income as it relates to our area, number of units that would be allowed, because there isn't actually a cost to the public, so there's more discussion about that. So right now the focus is on these specific nonprofits, but that's another discussion to have before council.
Lenny?
So I'm supporting this because I'm supporting it as a step in that direction. I do believe that I'd like to see that before us sooner rather than later. I think it's important that the private sector, who I think can play an important role in this, needs to be at the table with this. There's no reason that we should allow or that we should waive fees only for nonprofits. If they're building what we need built, if we need affordable housing and they're going to build it, we need to make that available. We need to make that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agreed. We talked with OMB on this issue. They're come to the table. They're interested in working with us. And so hopefully we can, the Planning Commission can make it a priority and get in front of us as soon as possible. Okay. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to allow the update to LMC 1.20.020 related to the waiver of certain fees for low-income housing projects. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. Now, next up on our ordinance is the camping ordinance. Mr. City Manager, or City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. So before you tonight, this evening, is a proposed ordinance related to camping on public property. So it's not news that there's an increased occurrence of camping on public property. Now, this is a national issue. This is nothing special about Lacey, but it is obviously affecting Lacey, much like every other jurisdiction in this area. Now, a lot of this camping is occurring on areas that are not intended nor designed for camping. In fact, the camping is occurring, it's an incompatible use for a lot of these areas, and our city code does not address camping on public property. As you know, as we discussed at the work session last week, several jurisdictions, I would say most jurisdictions, have some sort of regulations relating to camping on public property. Now, regulation of camping in public areas is permissible. If I could just offer a little bit of a recap, there's a lot of discourse in the past couple years relating to this issue. I want to clear up a couple of things, particularly related to the Martin v. Boise case. That was a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision. Now, that case, really briefly, the city of Boise had an ordinance that criminalized using any of the streets, sidewalks, parks, or public places as a camping place at any time. What the city of Boise had at that time was an ordinance prohibiting camping at all. It was a blanket over the city. Now, the defendants, the plaintiffs in the appeal, were cited and convicted under that ordinance. And what the Court of Appeals was looking at was whether or not the Boise ordinance was constitutional under the Eighth Amendment. And the court's analysis, which is precedent for us, was no. It was not constitutional under the Eighth Amendment. Now, the Eighth Amendment, it does three things. It limits the type of punishment the government may impose. It prescribes punishment that's grossly disproportionate to the severity of the crime, and it places substantive limits on what the government may criminalize. And it was this third provision, the substantive limits on what a crime can be, that the court focused on. And the court found that an ordinance that criminalized the act of sleeping on a street was unconstitutional when applied to a homeless person with no place to go. Now, the holding was narrow. It did not dictate that cities have any affirmative obligation to provide shelter. It did not indicate that anybody that wishes is allowed to sleep or sit or lay down on any piece of public property at any time. Rather, what the ordinance or what the court held was simply, or not simply, I mean, it's a complex issue, but the holding was clearly limited to the fact that a jurisdiction cannot prosecute homeless individuals for being homeless, for involuntarily lying on public property if they don't have anywhere to go. So, again, regulation's permissible. It's not a solution, nor is this ordinance intended in any way to be a solution to homelessness. Rather, it's a tool for the council to consider. It would offer the city control over what types of places would be appropriate for camping, where those public facilities might be that would be appropriate for camping, and perhaps when those facilities might be appropriate to be used for camping. The proposed ordinance does prohibit camping in public places, but it includes provisions which prohibit the enforcement against persons camping due to homelessness when adequate shelter is not available. So that is a brief recap. Of course, we could talk all night about this, but the recommendation is that council take action to adopt an ordinance adding a new chapter related to camping to the Lacey Municipal Code.
So before we get started, I need some definitions here. How do we determine what is adequate shelter space available?
There's a lot of undefined terms from the Boise decision, and there's no clear, bright line rule as to what adequate shelter space is. This is not an area that's going to be, it's just not clear. I think it would be safe to say that an area that's equal to or better than what is being used would be adequate shelter space. And again, it's going to be fact specific. It's going to be determinant on what the circumstances are. Obviously, a house with a bed and a kitchen and all that would certainly be adequate shelter space. If somebody is in a motorhome, their shelter space isn't really going to change. They're not looking necessarily, I wouldn't think, for something different, but it's, maybe where it would be more appropriate there.
So this specifically says that this ordinance cannot be enforced unless there is adequate shelter space available someplace else than from the public property that you're specifically asking them to move from.
Correct, and there's going to be some discretion involved there. The ordinance also contemplates policies to be developed by the police department. And officer involvement and officer discretion is always going to be a factor here. But again, I can't offer you a clear definition of what that is. That's not defined in the ordinance itself.
So I'd like to hear from.
Can I ask a clarifying
yeah.
question first? So, and I understand there's no bright line, so I get it's not an easy question to answer, but for the sake of us on council as well as the public, in your opinion, if we had, say we're making someone move, or police are asking someone to move from camping spot X, and we have another place where we've determined as a city that we're okay with them camping, there's no, certainly not any less, the condition's not any lesser than where they are. Would that, in your opinion, meet that definition?
I would think that would be appropriate.
Thank you.
So, Chief, can you tell me, given this ordinance, what would be the police's response to this ordinance?
Certainly, Mayor. So one thing I think that it gets lost in the discussion when we talk about a camping ordinance is when people observe people camping out in public, it's not always a call of a criminal complaint. It's a call of people that are sympathetic to somebody that's out, out without shelter. And they call the police department. And what this ordinance does is it gives us the authority, the legal authority to contact those individuals. So if there's something criminal in nature that's going on, that's what we do. We can handle the criminal aspects of it. But you have a very empathetic and caring police department, Mayor. And we understand that there's a need for us to engage our homeless community and provide whatever assistance we can to them to get some assistance. So I'm looking at this ordinance as much more than it's the enforcement of a camping ordinance. It gives us the ability to actually contact these individuals and make a difference, whether that is something, if it's criminal in nature, again, that's something we can take care of, but it also gives us the ability to address these individuals and look out for their care and safety as well, and hopefully find some of them assistance, some means to get out of the public area, to get off the street, and to be in a safe environment.
Okay, so I guess the question I have before I open up to the council, and then we can take some questions from the audience, is if we haven't determined a different place, a specific place where they would be allowed to shelter for a time. So until we have determined where that location is, this ordinance isn't enforceable. Is that correct?
The ordinance includes provisions that prohibit enforcement against a person camping due to homelessness if there's no shelter available. So in your hypothetical, if there is no alternate shelter available, you're directing law enforcement not to take action and not to cite.
Okay.
Now, one's got to come first at some point, again, and this is a tool. If there is shelter space available, then what the council is indicating is that they're choosing to limit where this sort of activity is appropriate.
But right now, to my knowledge, we haven't had any individuals camping on public property in a tent or anything like that. What the city of Lacey is currently dealing with is people who are in RVs or trailers or in a car right here on City Hall, right? We've had RVs and trailers here at City Hall for over a month. And so right now, do we have space for them to go if they can't be at City Hall if we pass this ordinance, right? I mean, or
I'll defer to Chief Semko on this point. I do believe there's multiple instances of persons camping in tents in the city. It's not limited to what's occurring at City Hall.
And that's correct. We have had several calls for service for citizens that are concerned with people that are camping on public areas. And currently, with absent the ordinance, we can make contact with those individuals and hope that they're amicable to engaging in a conversation. If they're not, that we have no legal authority to follow up or do anything else other than start a conversation. So again, this would give us the ability to dig a little bit deeper and see if there was something more we could do to help with the situation.
Councilmember?
So I have a process question. Typically, we put a motion on the table before further discussion. Since we are going to accept public input, do we put a motion on the table now, or do we do
No,
that after?
I would think that before we do that, we should probably hear from the public.
Before we put a motion
Yes,
on the table?
yes.
Okay, I'm just checking with.
Is there any other specific questions you have about process or anything else?
No more process questions for me. Am I understanding that our deliberation and comments are going to be a little bit later?
Yes.
So I have just a short little comment or a question. So they can provide directions to a shelter location, or they can offer one-time transport. Because we deal a lot more with RVs and cars, which may or may not be functional, but it's property that you're dealing with, their cars and their trailers. How do you perceive that would work?
That's a good question, Deputy Mayor. And again, it's going to be fact specific. The ordinance doesn't contemplate that exact scenario, nor I think could it contemplate that exact scenario. Perhaps it could be moved to that facility if it's broken down, and why is it broken down? Perhaps it needs gas. And I think this ordinance and the enforcement of it, it's going to depend on the particular facts, and there's going to be new developments, and there may be need to, down the road, take different action or expand or amend, as occurs with a lot of ordinance that this council's passed.
Is it possible to have a small slush fund in there that maybe could fill the gap if that ever occurs? I mean,
I defer to the finance director or the city manager on that point.
yeah.
I think there's a number of variables that we will not know. I think we could rely on the charity of the community or other nonprofits to deal with those situations, but we'll have to deal with those on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Is there any other specific questions about this ordinance? Language or any? Okay. So at this time, if there's any specific questions about this ordinance, I'll now take them from, from the people who signed up. And I think, is Karen White the first person to sign up? Is Karen White here? Do you not have any specific questions? Cheryl Kelso, yes, please. Can you please come up to the podium? And please keep your questions or comments about this.
Mr. Mayor, are we going to have them state what town they're from?
Yeah, can you please tell me obviously your full name and where you're from?
Cheryl Kelso, Lacey. I went to Lacey grade school. So I grew up here in the 50s when our founding fathers, in their wisdom, chose not to allow Black Americans in the community. And in some it was deplorable, shameful. And as I look at this, I think every time we ask a specific question, it's up to the discretion. I don't think you've really thought this through as to what this could actually mean in the long run. For example, and this is my question, let's say I go out and tie one on, and I'm in my car, and I decide I should not be driving home, and get out a blanket and a pillow, and I'm sleeping in my car. Am I camping? And can I be directed to a homeless shelter?
Chief, how would you deal with that circumstance?
Well, I know I shouldn't be out drunk in public, but
I would say that if you were out drinking and you pulled over someplace, you have a place to go. You just are not able to get yourself there safely. And if someone called because they felt that you were camping, then we would take appropriate action based on your situation as being a citizen that had a little bit too much to drink and made the wise choice to pull off the road. And then we could offer assistance, which would be very different than the ordinance we're talking about this evening.
But it would still be camping, wouldn't it?
I'll add to that, there's another ordinance that the city has related to parking, and that just limits the amount of time to 24 hours.
So so when you define camping here, have you put a time limit on it?
Yeah.
In this specific ordinance, there's not a time limit.
So aren't these things that we should be working out as to what the definition of camping is?
That's in there.
And is it?
Yes.
So that's a good question. Is time not a part of this ordinance? Right, that's your question.
Well, he just said
Yeah.
24 hours wouldn't be enough. and
A.
Would,
so-
yeah.
Sorry.
No,
But
that's a
I
good-
will open this up to other people. I
Yeah.
feel like I've taken enough time.
Okay, thank you.
Also, Mr. Mayor, the ordinance is online too.
Yes, hopefully does everyone have seen a copy of this ordinance? Yeah, it'd be nice if we had copies of this ordinance.
I'd just like to say that they might not have a residence, but they are our neighbors.
So the question is there a time limit where you consider someone camping according to this ordinance? No. There isn't.
Excuse me, no. And the question was specific to a motor vehicle pulling over and someone sleeping in the motor vehicle. Could there be some overlap, and could that be interpreted as camping? I suppose it could be. And if there was certain enough time for law enforcement to be called upon for them to investigate, I think there's always going to be officer discretion involved. And I just reiterate that there's also parking ordinances more specific to vehicular use already on the books. And I think there's a question.
If you look at the ordinance itself at 8.10.050 enforcement, first line says, prior to issuing any citation pursuant to this chapter, the investigating officer shall inquire whether the camping is due to homelessness. So this applies specifically to homelessness.
And not to
camping in this case. So the situation that you described would
Was
not
not
fall under
under
this
this
ordinance. That would fall under our parking ordinance, or possibly the idea that you've been, you're intoxicated in public, which would be another law enforcement issue to deal with.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
So also, on A, it does mention for the purposes of habitation, which is quite different.
Got it.
Does it require the person to incriminate themselves by saying that they're homeless?
Well, this would,
They're not criminal.
Have all the same constitutional protections that all Americans have.
okay, so that's a good question. Thank you. So next up is Martin Stafford. Yes. Specific questions about this ordinance. Please state your full name and where you're from. Keep your comments 3 minutes.
Martin Stafford, Lacey, Washington. I'm curious, I can see a lot of really good intent, and for both sides of the spectrum, where you have people that are concerned about safety, their individual safety of the residents that actually are established here. So many of the homeless that I see, there's so many different reasons for it, and I'm not going to get into that. But it seems that to move someone or provide additional safe location for these people to be, whether they are a permanent resident of Lacey or Washington State or California, it doesn't matter. I think it hinges on the alternate location that you're looking to put someone, or maybe advise them what's available to them. And I just don't see where there's a whole lot of viable solutions in that particular regard. I'm thinking that it's kind of like putting the cart before the horse. You want to move these people to a safer location. The intent is really good, and it makes me feel good, but I don't see, if this measure is adopted prior to having alternate locations to put, maybe the council should maybe look at alternate locations within their jurisdiction and establish that. Starting from scratch is going to be hard, because I don't see anything in place. I don't believe there is anything in place, is there? I haven't heard of any. Maybe we should be taking a look at available city property, setting aside, maybe working with some nonprofit organizations. I think this kind of really needs to be researched. The intent's good, but I just,
So sir, I agree, specifically about this ordinance. Obviously, in the ordinance, it says that we're unable to move someone unless they have another adequate place.
exactly.
And so I know this council is working on that issue. And so that is it's the cart before the horse question that we have to ask, is like, what comes first? Well, obviously, at the end of the day, if we don't have a space, then the ordinance is not enforceable. But we're working on that as well. And so there is some regional plans in place, and I know that the city has looked at a couple places. They're not quite ready yet, but we're looking at that as well. And so I get what you're saying, but I think within the specific ordinance, that is a different issue of like where and what the place is not necessarily addressed in this ordinance. And so I understand that, but in some ways, that means this ordinance is not enforceable until we have that place. And I think we all understand that.
oh, okay, maybe I might have missed it.
Mr.
Has
Mayor?
anybody maybe taken a look? Please.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm really glad you brought this up early, because as the mayor was saying, you know, we've wrestled with this question and been thinking about it a lot. So thank you for bringing it up. My conclusion to this point, based on the several discussions the council's had, many public comments, and then your comment reiterating this conundrum a bit, is that I think that the Ninth District Court, in their wisdom, put a place to be as the number one priority. I think that's a good thing. So we kind of have to step in now, it seems like, and say, okay, public places probably aren't, or just random public places aren't a place to be. So we're cognizant that we need to consider regarding enforcement a place to be, and we are working on that. But we need to have, first of all, establish these definitions and note that a random public place, not the place to be. So we're getting there, and I'm actually very pleased that the Ninth District Court established a place to be as a top priority.
I just don't see that in Lacey, a place to be, if you haven't worked out where the
Well,
place is.
we are working on it, and there are some things in the works, and
I didn't see that in
yeah,
the,
because we're not quite there yet, but we are working on it. And I know it's a process question. What do you do first? And this is a question I had to our city manager and to our city attorney, and I asked it right from the get-go, if we don't have that place yet, then why should we put the ordinance in? But we need the ordinance to establish the place.
Well, the other thing is the relationship so that the police can find out what their needs are and talk to them as well.
But on the flip side of the coin, we could be here talking about the location and you'd be saying, hey,
That's
we
a
don't have an
different
ordinance.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
it's a
the
process
order
question.
is, you know.
Another big point that we all concluded that this isn't a homeless ordinance we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is a camping ordinance, so we have to make some definitions about what and where camping is. But while this is going on, we're all concerned about homelessness.
but I thought the Ninth Circuit was specific in directing and upholding the rights of the homeless.
Yes,
They said,
in
yeah.
their decision.
and we'll comply with that.
Yeah.
But we, in the meantime, have to define what camping is and where camping should be. That's that's very important to all the citizens is, you know, what is camping and where is it? We have to determine that first. But homelessness is certainly a priority.
Yeah.
Does anybody mind if I ask just one more
Sure.
question in relation to this? The other thing is, there are other models of, Olympia has, I'm not sure how that's working for them, but has anybody maybe researched, I mean, if it's already invented and already actually, there's a model of how it works, has anybody, you know,
So-
I certainly wouldn't
yeah.
mind
So there's-
copying somebody else's work
Again,
on
that is, the where and how is different from this ordinance. What this ordinance is trying to do is establish if the person who's there on the property, if they're homeless or not, right? And if they're homeless, then, and if they need someplace to go, we need to be able to direct them to a place to go. If there's no place to go, then you're right. This ordinance is not doing anything. But there's, in some ways, those are two separate things.
And I'll
right?
just add to your question, Olympia has an ordinance almost identical to this.
Yes.
This is not new.
The difference,
This is a different issue than mitigating the,
So this is templated somewhat.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
no, there's several jurisdictions
Yeah.
around.
The difference between this ordinance and Olympia's ordinance is Olympia's ordinance does not require for them that there's another place for them to be. This ordinance does.
And Olympia's ordinance has language recognizing that the city manager can allow camping on city property if there's been an emergency declared. There's slightly different processes, but
That's-
prohibition against camping is in Olympia.
That was my
Okay,
concern.
thank you.
I was going to say, and I understand this is a very complex issue, homelessness, obviously, but we have to separate the camping ordinance from homelessness and mitigation of homelessness. They are two very different issues, and that is an issue that, believe me, this council's been talking about a great deal. We had a retreat for a full-day retreat where that was the primary topic of the conversation, and it is something we're working on, believe me. But this ordinance is not meant to be a solution to homelessness. That's not where we're trying to get with this ordinance at all.
It's really trying to identify who's on the property, if they're look like they're there on a semi-permanent basis. Are they there because they're homeless, or are they there for some other reason? And if they are homeless, then directing our officers to find a solution for that circumstance, right? That's what this ordinance is trying to do. So, yeah. Right? I'll clear that. Sure. I'm trying to go in order, but did you sign up for?
My name is Minister Phoenix Went.
Okay. Please give your full name, where you're from, and keep your comments 3 minutes.
Yes. Again, my name is Minister Phoenix Went, and I am actually of the houseless family itself, and I'm here to represent them specifically. Good evening. The 8th and 9th Circuit Federal Idaho Judge has made a ruling of no criminalizing of our subculture. This second attack on us is unconstitutional. You are our landlords. You must give us proper assistance to gaining proper housing according to the law. Since there is no relief yet provided, you are out of compliance. Along with the sheriffs are the jurisdiction officers, that the abuse of police powers could be used. Along with the Thurston County Commissioners declared a public health crisis for us houseless. You are part of Thurston County and the western states. Thus, you cannot go against a higher authority. So if your mother, father, your family member is out on the streets, how can you be the governing agency who tells others and yourself that you can't fight and use your position to protect your family member from death or harm?
Do you have a specific question about this ordinance?
That's what I'm asking. How can you be the government agency who tells others and yourself that you cannot fight and use your position to protect your family member from death or harm or abuse of powers?
I'm not sure if that is a part of this ordinance.
Yes, it is, because you're abusing who we are as a family. And on top of that, how is it that you can even do it this way? Remember last year, or the 2 years ago? I said 4 words to you guys. I will stop you.
So,
Well, this time I am asking of you, do I need to stop you? Because I do have an attorney as well we have an attorney that will protect us from an evil criminalization of us.
So specifically within the ordinance, what's the question that you have specifically about this ordinance?
You are our landlords. According to the Thurston County
Yes.
Public Health Crisis, how can you have an attenuation and discrimination law placed against us or ordinance placed against us?
Mayor?
Yeah. Thank you for your comments.
The ordinance was written in working with our legal staff, our city attorney. We do not believe that it violates your rights or anyone else's rights, and we do believe that it is written in accordance with what is current law, including the Boise decision. So obviously, you're free to disagree with us on that, as all people are free to disagree with any of the decisions this council makes. But we certainly would not be considering or even voting on something that we didn't believe was constitutional and legal.
Yeah. And again, specifically, if you are in a public place and you're homeless, an officer can only direct you to some place else that's safer than that current public place. So are you saying this ordinance shouldn't be able to direct you to a different public place?
If that particular public place was the only place that you could be in when you have medical conditions that could physically prevent you from going any further from, yes, food, yes, from a place to shower, and that is the only central spot to be able to actually move to. And here's the next question. How is it that you guys can allow for a municipal code that you guys are obviously struggling to get through when it has enough problems already and issues? Then how can you let an ordinance go through that has issues?
That's what we're here discussing today. I'm not sure this ordinance is criminalizing anything.
You're going against landlord-tenant law. You are criminalizing us.
Okay. Thank you for your
No, I'm
comments.
asking, why are you going against landlord-tenant law?
Is this going against landlord-tenant law?
No.
Yes, it is.
I don't think the council has an obligation or the
You are
council's.
landlords. You
the
have
council's-
obligation to us.
We can't spend the
Council
evening
is-
arguing with you about it.
And that's your 3 minutes. Is there anyone else?
Please.
Well, okay. I guess John had it. Sorry. Thank you.
Good evening, City Councilman. I have actually read through the ordinance. It was online, and I want to tell you, I think it's a very good ordinance. And yes, it is a camping ordinance. It's not a homeless ordinance. And the fact of the matter is that there's provisions in the ordinance to accommodate to the homeless people in their circumstances when there's no other accommodations available. So I appreciate that very much, that you have an ordinance coming forth. There was some questions which I have, which I think might be helping the ordinance a little bit more. And I think that the city's police chief over here, he had suggested that by having an ordinance, that actually enables the police to address these people for question and purpose of what they're doing. I think that that's very important, to be able to question, to find out who they are and what's going on with them in order to see that they help them. And obviously, the ordinance has two different provisions. One for people who just want to be camping out, and one for homeless people that may not have all other alternatives. I understand that. But one of the things which I think is important, having the Thurston County Homeless Survey recently come out, is that the people should be identified. The citizens that are living here and walking the streets and using the facilities that Lacey has need to have the safety margins. And one of the questions which I think needs to be addressed is in your ordinance would be that the police are within their ability to require identification to identify who these people are. In the Thurston County survey, while there was 800 identified, probably more homeless than that 96 of them were underage children. That leaves 704. On the Thurston County Sheriff's website, there is 108 transient registered sex offenders.
So specifically about this ordinance, is there something?
The specific
Mr.
part
Mayor,
is,
can we have the audience be respectful to all, everybody that's up here
Agree.
speaking? And
I'm going to try to get to specific questions about this ordinance. Please respect everyone's time here, and so we can get through this. So specifically about this ordinance.
Specifically is this, can you incorporate something that enables the police to identify the people as opposed to just walk up and say, are you homeless or you're not homeless?
So
To identify them and know who they are. Perhaps they're criminals that have a problem.
I don't know. Is that a legal question?
Well, I'm sorry. I think perhaps, Mayor, again, I'd just like to reiterate, council on very rare occasions allows any sort of comment or any sort of question on items that are on the agenda. Mr. Mayor, you did couch it as questions, and I would just perhaps, my understanding was that the council was going to allow brief comment and questions about the topic. And maybe is that a clarification that could be made?
I've been clear all along. This needs to be specific questions specifically about this ordinance.
That's not how I understood it. I misunderstood. I thought they were able to make comments and questions.
So it's only about this
only on the
ordinance.
agenda.
About the ordinance.
About the ordinance.
Ordinance.
Yeah.
But it does it, I guess the question I would have is, are you looking for something framed in a question, or can it be a comment?
I would specifically like a question about this ordinance, or a comment about something specific about this ordinance, because that's what we're determining today, this ordinance, not other issues.
Correct.
Yeah. Right?
Thank you for the
agree?
clarification, but I do think we do have an actual question, though,
Yeah.
right
So
now.
the question was identification.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's nothing in the ordinance, nor do I think there should be anything in the ordinance related to identifying anybody. This is an ordinance that is a tool. The council, if it passes it, will be regulating the use of public property. If there's somebody alleged to perhaps be violating that regulation, law enforcement would be able to approach and engage with the Constitution behind them and the Constitution in favor of the person they're approaching, and all the other rules that already exist are going to apply equally.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And
So,
as a regional issue that homelessness is, are regional facilities that are located outside of the city limits of Lacey considered to be accessible shelter, as the Supreme Court order had suggested? At what point in boundaries and how far away are facilities that are available? Most are in Olympia right now, so.
Thank you. And to answer that question specifically, that's one of the gray areas. As this council knows, a lot of the council's funds are budgeted for some of those facilities that don't happen to be in the city limits. One of the proposed homeless mitigation sites, that's a joint effort amongst all the jurisdictions, is right outside the city limits, but it's in unincorporated county. So I think it's clear that shelter space could be outside of the city limits, but how far, where, those are open questions.
and this,
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
real quick? I just want to make sure that it is clear to the public that the city of Lacey is budgeting and spending tax dollars on the homelessness issue. Even though those facilities may not be located, I just want to read what our city attorney said. We are spending money on facilities that are outside the city, so we are doing our part to help. There's a lot more to be done, and we've got a lot of work to do. But I do want that to be clear, because if the only place that we have to move someone to is outside the city limits, we are still funding these locations, these operations. So there would be nothing, and I don't think anything.
but, yeah.
Council answered it, but I don't see any reason we
And
wouldn't.
as
use
far
that
as I
surrounding
know,
area.
a lot of those facilities are booked. And so if they are full, then they wouldn't be available.
Okay, so, and then just as a secondary part, does that mean that you're going to be supplying the police department with a list of available bed facilities that would be available at all times? And so that way, when they approach someone to say you're homeless, and they say, I'm homeless,
Yeah.
then that's it. Oh, well, we don't have anyone, you're okay. So that was my questions. It needs to be addressed with some clarity. That's my comment.
Thank you. Chief, I'm sure you're aware of.
Yes, I'm very much aware of the issue of where folks would be directed to, and that certainly is a regional problem. That spacing that was discussed earlier, and when that does become available, that is certainly something that our staff will have readily available.
Okay, thank you. So next up, Lisa, do you have a specific question about this ordinance? Okay.
The question I was going to ask is different now, but based on what you said about that the,
Please give your full name.
oh, sorry, Lisa Gelati, I live in Lacey. Okay. My question is about what you said about passing this enables you to do other things? I don't understand that.
So without this ordinance right now, we are unable to engage anyone who's on public property on why they're on public property, because we don't have an ordinance in place that would allow us to address that.
Okay. Yes.
I'll just clarify, I mean, law enforcement can contact anybody at any time just to engage in discussion. But the fact of the matter, maybe Chief can expand on how that might play in.
So if somebody's camping on public property, and to the attorney's point, we can go up and talk to anybody. It's called a social contact, and have a discussion with anyone. However, if the person chooses not to speak to us and they're not in any type of violation of any law, we have no choice but to turn around and then walk away and not address any issue that may be there. So currently, there isn't any tool for us to legally engage someone that just doesn't want to be talked to. So that's what, whether or not they're homeless or anything else, if they're on public property camping and don't want to speak with law enforcement, then there's nothing that we can do further than request a conversation.
Okay, now on the ordinance, it does talk about being able to enforce and jail people and fine people up to $1,000. So I wanted to know how enforcing a camping ban is going to help the situation, number one, and how it's going to help us to be a more progressive city, or more accepting, and be able to move forward with.
Yeah. So the question specifically is when would a police officer impose a fine, right? That's according to this ordinance. Chief?
Well, let me be clear that the law enforcement doesn't impose any fines. We just enforce the law. But I think, if I may, Mayor, I think what our community member may be asking is, absent criminal activity, obvious criminal activity, which I'm sure you would all support that we take care of, how does this ordinance help anybody? Right. Is that what your question is?
Right,
Just to be
and how
blunt?
does it help us move forward
Okay.
with a potential mitigation site?
So let me answer that from a great deal of experience I have in this area, coming from Southern California. Right now, today, and it happened today, when our officers get a call from somebody that's been camping in a location, an unsafe location for the person that's there, who may be mentally ill, who may not be, but just does not want to talk to anybody, that wants to stay where they're at, and doesn't want to engage in a conversation. There's nothing that we can do but to walk away. this ordinance would enable us to have the legal authority to speak to that individual. And if they're not violating the law, then we just turn around and we walk away. If the person is violating the law, that remedy we can take care of. And if the person is, in this case, again, this isn't a homeless ordinance, it's a camping ordinance, but if the person is homeless, the terms of the law dictate that we will not enforce this ordinance because they are homeless.
Okay, thank you. Ron Workman? And great. Great, thank you. I appreciate it. And I hope if your question's been answered before, let's not come up and repeat the same question specific about the ordinance. We're going to try to get through this. Jack Potter.
Hi, everybody. I'm the homeless vet that's sleeping in one of those trailers back there, and this is the program I offer to help raise funds.
Thank you. I'll pass them out. I'll pass them out.
We can pass them down.
So, you have a specific question about this ordinance? Please, sir, over here.
Oh, okay. So,
Please.
all
Please
right, folks.
state your full name and keep your comments about 3 minutes, specifically about this ordinance.
All right, folks. This is what's going on. I live in the travel trailer behind the police department, and I'll tell you what's going on. A lot of folks are homeless, and so these signs will help folks get off the streets. Okay?
Can you answer the mayor's
Yeah. So is there a specific question about this ordinance?
Yes.
Okay.
The question is,
Okay.
not so much a question, but providing a solution, because all I've heard is questions. Paid safe parking will provide a solution. Madam
Okay.
Pratt.
Yeah.
Madam Pratt, you asked about a slush fund. Paid safe parking will provide that slush fund. What it is say the Shopco parking lot, which is not being used right now. We have a loss prevention officer in Lacey, or a theft prevention officer, who can go and talk to Shopco. And then folks like me can have a safe place to park for 1 month for a very nominal fee. There's no electricity. There's no bathrooms. You, of course, putting one there would be a smart idea, but there would also be smart to put trash collection there. But you would also know who's there. Everyone would have to be licensed and insured.
Thank you. That's,
Okay, so all I'm offering today
what-
is a solution.
okay.
Okay? That's all I wanted to give you. God bless.
Gabe? Gabe? Please
You
state-
want to know who I am and where I'm from?
Yeah, and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Washington State. My name is Gabe Sear, and I live in a very small motorhome. I currently am parked in Jack's area while I take care of my sister who's just had surgery. So I'll be here probably for a month or two. That's my intention. I'm definitely sleeping in my vehicle. What I am missing in terms of a question is, are there tons of people out here who want to camp that are not homeless? I mean, you say that this rule and ordinance is for people, not for the homeless, but for people who are camping. And I am missing who is out there camping that needs an ordinance that is not doing it because they're homeless, or at least houseless. I don't consider myself homeless. I consider myself houseless because mine moves down to Tucson and, out to Ocean Shores when it's 90 here and that kind of thing. But yeah, so who is it that this ordinance is purporting to take care of when it can't take care of the homeless?
Again, this ordinance isn't purporting to take care of anyone or anything.
Okay.
I think the ordinance, what council's looking at is down the road, they're regulating where camping can occur. And again, if it's a person that's homeless and there's no other alternative, what the previous speaker's indicating is an alternative. If there's an
right,
alternative,
I
then
got
that would
that.
be a place to go.
I got that.
And then if you're in an area that is not an alternative, then you'd be in violation of the ordinance. The ordinance regulates location, time, place.
So who is it that we're we're regulating? Because it's only the homeless that I'm seeing that are camping out there in their vehicles and putting up tents on the streets.
And
stuff.
assume, if you will, maximum available shelter, okay? As has been discussed, there is not clearly available shelter all over Lacey, okay? I think we can all agree on that.
Right.
If there were, then the place to be then would be in those locations. And then this ordinance would prohibit the ability to camp, like on the sidewalk right out here, or in the parking lot right behind us, or in the police department parking lot, or at the library. You know, and law enforcement would contact that person and they'd be like, there is a location over here just for your purpose, because you're homeless, because you don't
you're
have any
homeless,
place to
right.
go.
All right.
And it's a work in progress. So,
So it's the homeless that you are regulating with this,
no,
not
it's behavior.
who happen to be camping because they
So
don't have
this
a
is-
place to live.
Again, this is about where they can and cannot camp,
Right.
right?
Right.
Zoning, it's zoning.
Right,
It's not,
okay.
it's, yeah.
Okay,
So,
and,
so,
go ahead.
so specifically about this ordinance, what other question do you have?
Nothing other than I hear you don't know what the Martin versus Boise, you know, the outcome of that says that you have to have in your jurisdiction shelters, space for as many people as are homeless. Period. That's what it says. Now, I don't know about, you know, how that works out in terms of whether you can contract with Olympia or somebody else to provide your homeless, but it says in the jurisdiction and as many as have been determined are homeless. It's real pretty specific about
I
that.
think that's quite.
Yeah.
Can I just provide a comment? Again, not to oversimplify the ordinance. The city of Lacey, as your jurisdiction, has an obligation to protect its public property. We have 1,200 acres of parkland. We have 153 miles of streets with the right-of-way. We have the City Hall campus. What this ordinance is trying to communicate that those activities, i.e. camping, is not allowed in the park system, in the right-of-ways, in the City Hall campus, or any other publicly owned property. What this ordinance does do does afford the constitutional protections as articulated by the Ninth Circuit Court that says if you do find yourself camping, which you should not, and you are in the state of homelessness, then we will not fine or basically fall through in that ordinance because we have an obligation to protect your constitutional rights. But in general, we also, our obligation as a local jurisdiction is to protect the public property that the public expects us to be stewards of. So by having this ordinance, which there is a void in our current LMC, we do not have a regulation that dictates so specifically to the right-of-ways and other owned public property. So by having this, we're clearly communicating that this is not a compatible land use activity on public property. That's the first step. Then the second step, if there are people that are camping that maybe find themselves in homeless, we will do that in different ways, but this is the first step to sort of address that issue. So simply that is what this ordinance is trying to accomplish.
Wait your turn.
It's not so much a zoning issue, it's just trying to clearly communicate to the public that public places are basically available for everyone. And camping is not a foreseen activity in those areas.
And then and in order for you to be moved, there has to be a place for you to go. Right. So again, I'm not sure what your question was within this ordinance.
Well,
The question is, who else is going to be affected by this other than homeless people?
right.
So may I answer something? So we are not putting a name on those because we don't want to criminalize anybody. It's camping so that it's not a person. It is where the activity occurs, period, regardless of who it is. Secondly, we also have a responsibility besides protecting public places is the environmental health of our public places. So, you know, we don't want to put somebody at health risk for having garbage, human waste, etc., in an area where people could get quite ill, or that it would damage our groundwater and surface water types of things. There's that issue on top of all this. So location is a big deal. It is not who, but where. So we don't put a name on the who regardless. Now, all of you are saying homeless. Well, it could be. We don't care. I mean, we don't care whether it's homeless, a homeless person,
Care about the activity.
or another person. We care about the activity where it's at, if that's clear. I'm sorry.
That's not our intention.
Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Marie?
Mayor Ryder, does Lacey know how many homeless are in? Mayor, can we keep the outbursts?
Yeah. So, again, everyone respect this time where I'm gonna close down public comment.
Okay.
Can
Do
please-
I get to talk?
Yes, please state your full name, keep your comments 3 minutes, specifically on the ordinance.
Yes. My name is Marie New. I am just recently to the Lacey area. I am the surgical patient my sister's taking care of. And we are world travelers. And what I keep hearing, not just out here, but right here at this board, is homeless. I've been listening because a lot of it didn't make sense to me. And I appreciate the clarification that you've done thus far. However, you did not bring up the fact that there had been 2 cases, not just the Boise case. And that in Los Angeles, in the case that the Ninth Circuit Court dealt with, camping is sleeping with covering. Now, that means if you're in a park and you're taking a nap after having a picnic and your arm is over your face, that's camping. If you are on the side of the road in your vehicle and you have pulled out a blanket, that's camping. My question that is terrifying me is the only reason that I can see for this particular ordinance is to give the police probable cause to move, arrest, fine those that the fine people of Lacey decide they don't want here, making them less.
Do you have a question about a specific definition under?
How is this not a way to have probable cause for the police to fine, disperse, and jail quote-unquote campers?
That's not the intention of this ordinance. This ordinance specifically says if you're camping in a certain area that's not compatible, you will have to move to a different area that is compatible. Unless we don't have another area that's not compatible, then you will be able to stay there.
Mayor, it seems like the chief's opening comments answered this question.
Yeah.
Well, then how come it can be a misdemeanor? How come you can be fined by this ordinance?
If you don't move to the space that has been designated, is the only way this could be enforced. And it has to be available.
And just one further clarification on that. Keep in mind that the police do not impose fines or jail anyone. The police, we have a court system for that. So if in fact you were deemed to be in violation by the police, it would go through the court process. The police do not have the power to issue a fine.
Right,
Only
but
the court
you're
system can do
giving them
that.
the power by making an ordinance.
Well, the ordinance would allow the police, if there was a place available in case of someone who is homeless, to direct them to move to that other location.
Again,
That's
we
what
are
it does.
off the specific questions about this ordinance. So, okay. There's people still, I'm sorry, we're gonna go in order.
At the end.
Okay, yeah. Nancy? Please state your full name.
Hello, I'm Nancy Yant. I live here in Lacey. My first question is, when a policeman or woman would see somebody in a camper and ask them about their reason, whether they're enjoying the nature or whether they're homeless, and there is, let's say, a place in the shelter in Olympia, are you suggesting that they then have to go to a shelter and leave their place where they have already to sleep, go sleep somewhere else for one night because it's a one-time thing, and especially in the winter when the shelters fill up and people who are sleeping without any shelter at all would need that space, and we're taking people out of their vans to go sleep? Is that what this is saying?
No, specifically, in this ordinance, if they're in a place that's City Hall, we would direct, and if we didn't want them to stay in City Hall, we would direct them to a place where they could move their RV and stay.
Good. And
for
where
a
would
period of
that
time.
be?
We are still working on that, and until we get that place, you're right, this ordinance isn't enforceable.
Until you get that, this ordinance is ridiculous. Excuse me, I don't mean to criticize particularly.
We understand there's a
but
process question.
It's okay. Where I have worked on this issue, we set up the places first. We had a nonprofit who the police would refer the van or the people to, and in my case, we worked with the vans. They would be registered. They would be helped. What services do you need? I worked in a church. We provided some of the places. They would be assigned to our church.
So
we would provide a bathroom.
I understand
They
that.
had rules. They couldn't leave their stuff all over, blah, blah, blah. And as they progressed in the process with the nonprofit, getting a job, whatever, they would move out of the space. Somebody else would have a space.
I understand that.
Okay, until you have that, this is premature, because what you're saying is you should not be existing here.
No.
And we don't know
I'm not
where
gonna
you
go-
should exist because we haven't done it yet. And that is an existential question that is, how can you pose that to a real human person?
It's unopposable until the actual.
So again, we've talked about the process question is the ordinance come first or the space come first? What we're saying is we need the ordinance, and then we are working on the space, and the ordinance cannot be enforced until there's space.
I
And
have
we
never
understand
seen that before in the cities I've been in, because to find out who somebody is and tell them what to do when you haven't got your plan is not necessary before you have your plan.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Stryker? Can you please state your full name? Keep your comments about 3 minutes, and do you have a specific question about this ordinance?
Okay, it's okay. Even though this ordinance, basically, I'm Uncle Stryker, and
Could
I
you
love
pick
to.
up the mic, please?
Oh,
What's your name for the record?
oh, real name? Oh,
Yeah.
Ronald E. Durstead, basically, but I usually don't give off my dead name. It's
okay.
because I actually keep my kids protected and my nieces
Thank
and
you.
nephews that have.
Do you have a specific question or comment about this ordinance?
Yeah, it's because of the situation that we haven't been doing our jobs and stuff like that, and we're kind of feeling a little lazy. It's because we haven't been learning and keeping ourselves growing better and keep ourselves well established. That was my problem, was when I came here today to go with this establishment on it. It's because I was starting to get very, very nervous about it. It's because how we're supposed to help and teach our kids not to do the same thing like the adults do and throwing our
Thank you.
trash.
Do
and
you have a
things.
specific question about this ordinance? Okay.
I'm just a disabled. I try to do as my best as my ability is to try to help out being a translator for the kids and trying to make sure if they learn and they have a growing responsibility with themselves so they don't have to do like they would do to damage the city, basically. So we're trying to help them out and understand as backwards just as important as the adults.
Okay, well, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
If you have another specific question?
It's already done. I can't.
You have a specific question?
Yes, but however, I'm not feeling very well if our jobs are being pulled back and how we're supposed to learn if we don't get into a job that we feel good about and us kids would grow to learn on and keep us from not doing those things like the adults would prior to do, basically, so we can do a lot better so we won't have to like have like bad decisions or
Striker, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your comments.
But we need our help back again.
Okay, thank you.
Basically, so we can get back up there, we don't have to feel just as lazy, so we can get things done. I would like to work.
Thank you.
But I would like to help out in this.
Thank you.
Darn ordinance.
Have you, Terry? Terry Johnson, yes.
Good evening, Terry Johnson. I live in Lacey. Boy, oh boy, you folks have your hands full here. Actually, I want to open up with a public apology to Rick Walk here. I made a comment a week or so ago at the the planning commission meeting, and it was a little uncalled for. So I'm apologizing to Rick for that statement. He graciously met me outside, and we chatted about it, and I think we put it to rest. But nonetheless, I wanted to apologize to you for that, Rick. At any rate, you folks have your handful. Just something I want to say about this ordinance. Whether you folks agree with it or disagree, I voted for every one of you up here with the exception of Linda. I know you're recently appointed, but I just want to remind you folks that you guys work for us, and I hope you truly listen and support the voting, tax-paying citizens of Lacey. That's all I want to say about this ordinance.
Thank you. Steve?
Can I ask, is there a way to get on the list if we missed our meeting?
We're getting, that's near the end, and we've taken public comment more than we normally would, so we're gonna have to get on with this meeting. Yeah.
My name's Steve Nutzwander. I live out in Meridian Campus in the growth area in Lacey. I've been involved with the judicial process for 47 years myself. So when I read stuff, I kind of read it as it states and not what I want it to read. And one of the problems I'm having with this, and I guess I want clarification, is that it says any person. It doesn't say homeless or anything else. It says any person to store personal property, including camp facilities, tent vehicles, camp paraphernalia, in any park, any street, or publicly owned parking lot, or publicly owned area, improved or unimproved, blah, blah, blah. So my question to you is, first question to you is this. My Uncle Smith and his 12 kids drive up to my house in their fifth wheel and camper, and they park on the public street in front of my house, and I hook them up to my water system and my electricity, and according to that, they're in violation of your ordinance. Is that what your intent is?
City Attorney?
So again, parking recreational vehicles on public streets, not private streets, but public streets for more than 24 hours is a violation of a parking ordinance.
It's
It's already on the books, correct?
Well, then the next question is, if we already have that on the books, then why do we need this ordinance at all? Because that sort of takes care of all this to begin with.
And so those would be two ordinances that could, as you point
But
out.
my point is, you don't need the second ordinance when you got the first, because the first takes care of the second. Secondly, I would like to ask, you said if the police comes up and they find, as soon as you get everything in place, which I agree with the lady that says you got the cart before the horse, but, and then he gets fined $1,000 for a misdemeanor, and he can't pay. I mean, most of these people you're dealing with don't have enough money to go get a motel room, must pay you, the city of Lacey, $1,000 because they violated this ordinance. What are you going to do with that? You're just going to forgive it? Because once you forgive it, you've just nullified your whole ordinance. If you can't enforce it, it's a worthless ordinance. And that's all you don't need to answer my question, just want you to think about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take one more. You guys need, okay, you're right there.
Yeah.
It's the last one.
All right.
state
So
your
I'm a
full-
local attorney. My name is Spencer Baldwin. My first question is, how is this not a pretext? Now, a legal pretext in Washington state is not allowed. It's impermissible under our Constitution. So what your police chief just said is that he needs this objectively in order to be able to institute a search. And we have very strict protections on searches. So I'm wondering, how is this not a pretext?
City Attorney.
So, noted, it's an ordinance that prohibits camping on public property. What Mr. Baldwin is referring to is a constitutional protection against unlawful searches and seizures, and using some law that they're not going to enforce to find criminal behavior of something else, in using one to find the other. There's court process to undermine that. I mean, this doesn't relate at all or contemplate pretextual stops. It's a camping ordinance, and it prohibits camping on public property. There is a whole Title IX of the Lacey Municipal Code, containing myriad criminal offenses, all of which could be argued in the court that the contact was pretextual. This is just another ordinance. And any argument like Mr. Baldwin's illustrating would be carried out and could be carried out in the
And that's
court.
expensive. So how expensive do you anticipate this ordinance to be in terms of officers issuing ordinances and me going against Joe in the courtroom? What do you anticipate those administrative expenses to add to this when we have to actually solve the houseless problem? And if we're devoting our resources to this, what use is that? How does that further us in our 2005 requirement to solve houselessness by 2015?
Did you have a question about the specific ordinance?
Yes, the definition of camping, and if we want to look at that under 810030 sub A, camp means to pitch, use, or occupy camp facilities for the purpose of habitation. So that seems right there to define a certain legal interest that could be implicated for substantive and procedural due process. So how does this not run afoul of the Equal Protection Clause? And alternatively, how does this not run afoul of the Supremacy Clause when we're looking at the ICCPR, CERN, and other international agreements that we have ratified in this country?
Do you have a?
That's a question.
Okay.
That's about law.
Okay, that's
That's
your
a good
city attorney?
question. And yeah, and I don't have a prepared answer for every question that could be come up about this ordinance. I mean, again, allegations about the impermissibility of the enforcement of this ordinance or of the constitutionality of it, there's a process for that. All I can offer counsel is my opinion that this is a legal ordinance and that council would be backed by the law by adopting it.
Do you want to be on the hook for attorney's fees?
Okay. Do you have
Because when somebody
okay,
challenges
that's-
something like this, like myself, you're going to be on the hook for attorney's
Okay.
fees as well, because
Thank
it's
you.
unconstitutional.
Yeah, thank you. That's gone off we're done with the 3 minutes. We are done with public comment. I thank you all for
Hanging
for
in
surviving surviving that. Before we go on to council consideration of this ordinance, I think for me the difficulty in this entire process that I would agree with is that we're putting an ordinance in place that might not be enforceable because we don't currently have the facilities to move them. And I understand that. I understand that. And that is an issue. but it's a horse in a cart situation that we're dealing with. One way, sooner or another, we need both, right? We need an ordinance that defines where it's permissible and unpermissible to stay on public property, and we need facilities and resources to provide a place, an alternative place for that. I mean, that's the two things that we're dealing with. So in my mind, they both come together, and it won't be effective until we have both. But we need both. So as we go,
I'd like to put it on the floor for discussion.
yeah,
So is there a number to this ordinance?
you can.
Or to
It says,
refer it by the
it's-
context?
Yeah, so you can.
No,
I
no
don't-
I
number.
move that we, for point of discussion, so we can deliberate, approving ordinance 1549 of the city of Lacey, Washington related to camping, adopting a new chapter 8.1 of the Lacey Municipal Code, and approving a summary for publication.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion. Deputy Mayor.
So, we're so close to having other things in place. But what I really, earlier during our work sessions, really was pleased about and made me comfortable with this is the fact that our Chief Semkos had said, well, it's really important to have a relationship with people that are unsheltered so that we get to understand their needs. And this helps that. It helps us make them more comfortable, but it also then addresses what can be done, and it can come back to us so we can do more. And I think that's an important thing. One of the things about being unsheltered, you tend to isolate yourself, and therefore you become, not as comfortable in society. But when you are in an unsafe place or someplace that needs to be better, it seems to me that the only way to do this is to come up with ways that we can address and think about what type of sheltering is necessary. And what people don't realize how much Lacey has done in the last, I don't know how many years, 2 or 3, maybe longer, have done in order to make sure that, one is we try to, we've given quite a bit to, for instance, the Salvation Army. We gave $50,000 for more beds. No, they're not ready to go put them in place yet. That's in August or something. We've given money for to the homeless students in North Thurston, which is huge. We've done a number of things for that, because what people don't realize is their students living in their cars, some of them, and they're not. They range in age, so that is kind of scary. And then the other thing is we've done a lot of, we've started partnerships with both the faith community and North Thurston Public Schools to give them, to put a place where homeless students there'll be a house and 2 or 3 can live on a public property for them. And so, we've done a lot more, but it's not enough. This is much more multifaceted than just this way or this way. As I said, there's issues of also environmental health. So I think this is a step. It's a very small step, and yet it's the cart before the horse. But and I don't know which comes first, but if in 2 months we've solved our issue of where they can go, that's a positive thing. And that's not it sounds 2 months. That's really a long time. No, it isn't. Not when we've been working on this for 5 years or whatever. So I'm comfortable with this.
Thank you for your comments. I'll go right down the line.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I've heard tonight most municipalities have similar ordinances. People can, they're going to interpret them or determine what they mean solely by the individual. But I've stated on multiple occasions that I'd vote contrary to my own opinions or beliefs or even faith if I felt the people wanted or demanded it. So my principles and beliefs demand that of myself as well. If history tonight proves my decision wrong, I truly hope I will be forgiven. But I have to be true to myself and what I believe is right and what the people want out of their municipality and their government. So those are my comments.
Councilmember?
Sure. So clearly, this is a difficult decision, difficult situation to work on and deal with. And it obviously brings out a lot of passion from people. That was pretty obvious here tonight. But in the end, we as an elected body, and each of us individually as elected council members, the job is to represent the 51,000 people in Lacey. Those 51,000 people expect us to protect the property that their money pays for. So all of the areas that we're talking about, the public areas, the parks, the roads, all of this are paid for by you, by all of the people here in Lacey. And it's our job to protect those places. So I believe it's our obligation to do that. I believe that's what we need to do today. Clearly, there's work to be done. There's no one on this council believes this is the end-all, be-all, and the answer to all of these issues. We understand that. We're working on it. I can assure you that. And I can give you my word that as long as I'm on this council, it'll be a priority that we continue to work on. But, we have to start somewhere. And without the ordinance in place, our officers don't have the ability to do their job. Currently we have, and Mr. Potter, I think his name is, mentioned that he's camping here on the grounds, right here at City Hall. That's not a place that I think camping is appropriate here at City Hall. This is a building whose function is to be the seat of government for the entire community. Having people camping here on this property is unacceptable. So, and it's on us to find a better place for them to go. And until we do, obviously, we can't enforce the rules in this ordinance. But once we do, I think it's completely appropriate for us to move people from that property. So that's all I have at this.
Mr. Mayor.
All of the property we're talking about is public property.
Hey, enough. Let's go. Councilmember Hearn.
I reiterate that, again, this is before I do that, I want to really thank the public for participating in this. We're always looking for engagement with the community, and we've received engagement on these topics for months, and we really appreciate it. This is a camping ordinance dealing with public property, and it is our responsibility to over that. So I think this is great. It also includes considerations for those individuals who happen to be homeless, and I think that that's a compassionate thing to do as well, and also in line with what the courts have decided. So I think this is an opportunity for our city.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that if there's any further outbursts, that the person making those outbursts please be removed from the chamber.
Duly noted.
Can I get a second?
No, I don't need a second. Go ahead.
A lot of the conversation tonight has been about process and folks believing that perhaps we are chicken before the egg, or however that goes. When I look at a process like helping our houseless neighbors to be housed, that is a very large issue. And we have to be able to take step by step things that we can control right away. The idea of housing our entire community is not something that happens quickly. And so if we can do something like this ordinance that takes a first step, I am in support of that. I have never known this community to lack compassion. We do a number of things in this community already. Through the Lacey Veterans Hub, through affordable student housing, through Habitat for Humanity, creating opportunities for all of Lacey residents, whether they have an address or not. And I believe we will continue to do that. So if this is a first step toward that ultimate goal, then I'm in favor of it.
Councilmember Cox?
Before I begin my comments, I want to let all of you know that next Thursday, we're going to have a Council on the Road meeting. It'll be at 6 o'clock next Thursday at Salish Middle School. And I think some of the comments that people may have wanted to say tonight would be more appropriate for that meeting. So please, if you want to continue this conversation, that would be a great time to do it. So some of you, particularly at this table, will remember that 2 years ago, I testified against this ordinance when I was a candidate for city council. Much has changed since then. The housing crisis is getting worse and worse. We're seeing more and more people struggling financially. And sadly, hundreds of people are unsheltered and living on the streets, not just in Lacey, but in Thurston County and elsewhere. I continue to believe that it is wrong to criminalize homelessness. But that's not what we're doing tonight. I've heard from scores of people on all sides of this issue. I'm also uniquely positioned as a council member because I represent Lacey on an intercity committee on homelessness and affordable housing, on the community investment partnership that works with the county to provide grants for service organizations who help the unsheltered, on the Community Action Council, on the Thurston Thrives Housing Action Team, and recently I've joined the board of Interfaith Works. So all of these experiences have given me, I think, a pretty rooted understanding of where we are. What you're not going to get from a dry reading of this ordinance that we're considering tonight is the direction that our new police chief, Ken Simcoe, is setting for our police department. He brings 25 years of experience working with the unhoused in Santa Monica, California. In the short time he's been here, I've come to admire, respect, and trust the chief's approach to homelessness because he's all about building relationships and helping people. If I thought for a minute that his aim in asking us to move this forward tonight would be so that he could go send out officers and start kicking people out of the parking lot here, I would be voting no. We're working to provide places for people to go, and until, as we've heard tonight, and until we have that, and there's no place to send them, they'll be allowed to stay in place. I've heard it from a number of people who work with the unhoused, and they are understandably alarmed about this ordinance. However, as a council member, my job is to represent everyone, from the unhoused to the very privileged. I'm in deep sympathy with those living on the street and the people trying to help them. I also understand that unsanctioned camping in parks and streets and City Hall can present a public health threat. I also understand the residents of Lacey who have strong feelings about the unhoused. Some of the comments I've received and read are truly appalling, though, and I would ask people who make those comments to remember that we're all human beings and we need to treat each other with respect. After much thought, research, and conversations with staff and community members, I have decided to vote yes on this camping ordinance. I have faith in our police department and our staff to take a compassionate approach while keeping the unhoused and the housed alike safe.
Very well said, Councilmember Cox. Well, we've been moved and seconded. I think this council knows where I stand on this issue. I think ideally, I would rather have resources already in place before we pass this ordinance. But as it's been pointed out, it's a chicken and egg scenario, and I think we need to first start establishing relationships with people to have a better understanding of where they're at and what resources they need. And if we don't even have that basic tool right now, how are we supposed to get started, right? I mean, if we can't engage someone and try to find out what their true needs are, then we're not really doing anyone a service here. And I have complete faith in Chief Simcoe as well. And I have faith in the compassion of not only this council, but of our staff and everyone who loves Lacey. And I know we're going to work hard and do what we can to help people. That's what we're trying to do here. But you have to have a first step. You have to have a basic guidelines to at least engage in a conversation. And we don't even have that right now. So what I hope this does is it establishes a conversation. We find resources, we invest in resources, and we can move people to compatible places where they can be safe, where their property can be safe, and they can start receiving help and change hopefully their life for the better. And that's my goal, and I think it's the goal of everyone here on council. So given that, it's been moved and seconded to adopt this ordinance, adding a new chapter related to camping in the Lacey Municipal Code. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you. That was very tough. Thank you for all coming tonight. Thank you for all coming tonight. I appreciate your concern and your carrying on this. Councilmember Cox stole my thunder. We are having council on the road next Thursday at Salish Middle School starting at 6 o'clock. And one of the main topics of that meeting is to get feedback from the public and for us to share more information on what we're doing and get feedback on our legal obligations and everything else, and we'll have a broader conversation then. So thanks for bringing that up, and I hope we can see most of you next Thursday at Salish Middle School. Okay, and next up on our agenda is a referral from the Planning Commission, the Wireless Communications Facilities Small Cell Regulations.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. This agenda item is a recommendation to adopt an ordinance that revises regulations for wireless communication facilities. So we adopted interim regulations January 10th of 2019, and they're effective for 6 months. And the interim ordinance addressed key issues that the Planning Commission has been considering, including aesthetics and establishing a process for permitting new small cell wireless facilities. We held a public hearing here February 14th. Since then, the Planning Commission and staff have continued to refine the interim regulations, and we developed a final proposed amendments for small cell regulations. So I'm going to go through quickly what our small cell regulations say. In summary, they haven't changed a whole lot from what you saw earlier this year. We've just continued to do housekeeping, clarify items, and just make it more clear what our process is. So small cells, as opposed to macro cells, they just fill in the cellular network. You've heard a lot about 5G. This is basically that network filling in more small cells throughout the community to supplement the much larger towers that are in our community. Give you a sense of size and height. They range between 35 to 45 feet generally is where they're placed. They can be placed on utility poles, such as our Puget Sound Energy poles or city streetlights, or on a brand new pole. A lot of these want to be placed in the right of way. They need fiber power, and it just requires a franchise agreement with any provider. The FCC gave us a lot of requirements, the Federal Communications Commission, that we had to follow, which is what prompted these regulations in the first place. So how do we regulate these things at the local level? They gave us size requirements for antennas, which are 3 cubic feet. They gave us accessory size requirements for all the supplemental equipment that goes with these antennas for 28 cubic feet. And then height limits as well were defined. And a lot of our height limits would probably range between 44 and 47 feet, maybe just depending on the size of our streetlights and utility poles. And where it makes sense and where it's applicable, we can place some of the accessory equipment underground so that it's not all sitting in the right-of-way or on a pole. And the final proposed regulations meet all the FCC requirements. They address aesthetic standards, which the Planning Commission has thoroughly discussed with staff. And it also really just laid out what the permit process is and how long it will take to get through the permit process. Just a couple highlights on the aesthetics and what we're requiring. So if someone wants to put something on a city-owned streetlight or a Puget Sound pole or a new pole, we have standards for what those are going to look like. So if they want to use a city streetlight, they require a structural analysis. As well, if it doesn't meet any sort of structural requirements we have, they have to replace it with a new pole that looks pretty similar to what we have. So we have pictures in our ordinance that are new that kind of just show what it looks like to have an acceptable pole and a not acceptable pole. That was kind of an update to the code that we put in there. And same with wooden poles. We said, okay, you can have one per pole. You can't have more than that. And on the right side is what it would an acceptable pole look like. And if you have something brand new in the right-of-way, it has to conceal all the wires and equipment to the best of its ability and match any existing poles in the corridor. So say on College Avenue or Yelm Highway would have to blend in with what's already there. And just a couple updates to our telecommunication franchise requirements, just about safety issues. If a pole falls over in the right-of-way, can we immediately remove it? Safety switches, what we do in emergencies, indemnification. Just a couple clarifications on what would happen if any piece of equipment fell off on property that we own. And we also just made it more clear what the, they call them shot clocks, which is just how much time do we have to approve or deny a permit. The FCC laid that out for us. We just had to include that in our ordinance. So for co-location, meaning if they want to put a piece of equipment on a streetlight or a PSE pole, we have 60 days to approve or deny that. If they want to put a new pole, we have 90 days, and then the franchise agreement process, we have 120 days. And just, this is not part of the ordinance, just letting you know what's next. We haven't had any applications or pre-submission conferences, so not much interest. I think we're kind of a second, third tier market for 5G. So that buys us a little more time to work on our aesthetic standards. And what we're going to do is pursue some consultant help with figuring out some more cost analysis with different types of models for leasing, antenna space, and really a universal design for a pole. So if someone wants to place an antenna somewhere, it's a standardized piece of equipment, and they can put more than one in there, but it doesn't look like it. It's all concealed. So we're just kind of working on more of the aesthetic piece for when we do have people asking for permits. And with that, we had a public hearing at Planning Commission on May 7th. No comments were received. After the public hearing, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval to City Council, and then the Land Use Committee received a briefing on this on May 28th. So the recommendation is to approve.
Is there any questions?
Adopting small
Move
cell
to
wireless.
adopt an ordinance that revises regulation for wireless communication facilities.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next up is the 2019 to 2038 Capital Facilities Plan.
Yes. So when we talk about public facilities, this item is to approve an ordinance adopting our 2019-2038 Capital Facilities Plan. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what the plan is, what it isn't, and just a few highlights of what's in it. So a capital facility, that's a thing that cities own, like streets, parks, roads, water systems, sewer systems, all of our utilities, just to clarify. And a capital facilities plan is required under the Growth Management Act. There's a number of required elements under growth management, and a capital facilities element is one of those. And there's a couple things that need to be in that capital facilities plan. One's an inventory of what we have, where it's located, the capacity of those, and the forecasted of future needs for what those needs are going to be in the future, 40 years out. And then the proposed locations of new facilities to meet the levels of service we've defined. And then at least a 6-year plan to kind of finance all of those projects. So it's a 40-year view with a 6-year plan. And then a requirement that our capital facilities plan is consistent with our land use element. And if it's not, we need to reassess our land use element. And just to touch on capital projects, we approve an annual capital budget. It includes both projects that are in our capital facilities plan, and also just annual capital budgets that are for operations and maintenance. Sometimes they get a little confused. So everything in the capital facilities plan are projects that are meant for something new or an expansion of something. Whereas our operation and maintenance are just kind of routine things like a new roof or replacing a like-for-like vehicle or something like that. It's not in the capital facilities plan. That would be in the annual capital budget. And everything in our capital facilities plan links up with our comprehensive plan. So kind of high-level vision down to the where the money happens. And then those operation and maintenance projects fit in there in the annual budget as well. But the idea is that everything in that capital facilities plan can be referenced somehow in our in our comprehensive plan in one of our elements. Our capital facilities plan draft right now is on our website, all the different sections. We have all the sections for general government, parks, transportation, wastewater, stormwater, and water. And you can see all those individual projects in there. It's been posted on there for a couple weeks now at least. And I'll just give you a couple highlights of what's in there from the executive summary. So expenditures by category, you can see transportation and water, kind of the bulk on the expenditure side. On the revenue sources side, a lot of it's general facilities charges and arterial street fund. These are all in the executive summary. And then just a couple highlights from each of the sections of the plan. So in general government, we have some improvements in Woodland District. We're going to do some strategic facility planning on our government facilities like City Hall and the maintenance shop to look at space needs in the future. Looking at our police station, looking at same kind of issues with facility expansion. And then the museum at 5700 Lacey Boulevard. On the park side, we're doing some master planning, putting in that depot trail amenity and some trails at Pleasant Glade. Transportation, a lot of these transportation projects are actually in process right now. Lebanon Street's just about done. On the sewer side, we're just improving sewer capacities. There was a project that was going to go down Sleater-Kinney, but they decided to put it on Golf Club because it would save not only money, but it would be less inconvenient for shutting down streets. And then upgrading the lift station, 19. Stormwater facilities, just improving conveyance so we don't have flooding in neighborhoods, improving our stormwater system. And on the water side, new reservoirs for growth, for new water wells, and improving some water lines. With that, we had the same public hearing on May 7th at the Planning Commission, and the conclusion was that they unanimously recommended to adopt it. And then we did a briefing at the Land Use Committee on May 28th. So the recommendation is to adopt an ordinance that revises, oops, sorry, wrong one. Recommendation to adopt the capital facilities plan for 2019-2038.
So I move to approve the ordinance adopting the 2019-2038 capital facilities plan.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I know this is, a lot of this is just normal planning that we do, and as other issues arise, we have to adjust for them. But this gives us a basic outline of some of our major capital facilities plans, especially in the near future, in the next 6 years. And so, obviously, this is required by law. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to approve the ordinance adopting the capital facilities plan. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Next up is a resolution, the sole source for purchasing pump and apparatuses. Scott.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. So I just want to let you know that our senior utility engineer, Terry O'Neill, had prepared a phenomenal presentation for you tonight. But when your agenda was flipped, I offered that she could go home and I'd cover it. So you're going to get the very abbreviated version from me. So staff is requesting that council approve a resolution declaring Pump Tech Inc. to be the single source of supply for purchasing the necessary Peerless 7-stage 12 LD pump. So a little bit of background on that. Out at our Hawks Prairie water facility, one of our wells had been sanding, and so we've been working that issue for a couple of years. Had a consultant working on that, running tests. And so at the end of the day, what we're doing is changing the type of pump that's going to be in that well. And so the consultant, we gave them the demands that were needed. You know, they determined the type of pump that would be needed for that. And that is a sole source of supply. And the difference in pumps to cure this sanding issue is the type of pump that was in there, an inline pump. Every time the pump stopped, that well is 650 feet deep. You had a 650-foot head that would, plunge down into that and disturb the material around the screens in the well. So this is a submersible pump. So when the pump turns off, that head of water does not drop. So that allows that formation to remain stable and not have the sanding issue. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
So I guess the big question is there only one company that makes this pump? That's why we have to go single source?
So there's one company that makes this pump, and then the other thing is that they specify a sole supplier in Washington and Oregon, and they do that for quality control because they want to know that the company that installs and maintains those pumps, meets their standards.
Got it.
I would move to forward the resolution declaring Pump Tech Inc. to be the single source of supplying for purchasing the necessary Peerless 7-stage 12 LD pump and apparatuses.
Appurtenances.
Sorry, I'm gonna step in here. The correct motion would be to adopt the resolution declaring it to be a sole source of supply, not to forward it.
Oh, okay.
This, yeah.
Motion to forward, oh, yeah, you're right. It's a motion to declare it, not to forward.
To approve the resolution.
To adopt a resolution.
My bad there. We copied and pasted from the utility committee.
I see that.
That's actually my bad. It was forwarded to me, and I told Terry it was good to go, and I didn't edit it, so.
Yeah, we'll blame the city attorney again. Oh, and Scott signed it? Oh, jeez. Enough blame to go around then. So the correct motion is to declare Pump Tech Inc. to be the single source of supply for purchasing necessary Peerless 7-stage 12 LD pump and apparatuses to the full, for adoption. Yeah, that's the motion.
Is that, and it's your motion?
Yeah, who's the second?
I will second that.
Great, thank you.
We got through it together.
Whoosh, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Councilmember.
So the typos are not my fault. But I think it's pretty awesome that our director allowed Terry to go home, not stay late, and knows what's going on. So good job.
Thank you.
I don't think there's much Scott doesn't know.
Well, this is actually this is really good news. As we know, this has been a problem well for a long time. We spent a ton of time trying to figure this out, and so it's been an issue. And I'm glad we finally have a solution. So it's good that we got to this point.
I was just given the privilege of having a tour with their department and was at that well, and it is fascinating and incredible, all the work that they do to keep our water clean, and the growth that's going to be happening there. This pump is completely necessary to provide for the city, and it's very cool.
Great. Is
To
there
say
any
the least.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
City manager, you have anything?
No report.
Next up is standing general committees, finance and economic development. Is me. So first up, finance committee met on May 28th. We had several items on our agenda. First one was an update from our finance director about the TCOM 911 loan update. Years ago, TCOM needed to do some improvements, and they didn't have the ability to go out and get the funding. They asked if they could borrow the money from the city of Lacey. We had the funds available. It was a $1.2 million loan, and they're at the end of that. So their last payment was June 1st, and so we're done. That's paid for. So that was a really good thing that the city of Lacey was able to step up and help TCOM to get through that. And now, of course, they're faced with an even bigger issue that I'm pretty sure the city of Lacey is not going to be able to let them borrow the money for. So more on that to come. Next up is the city workforce. I think most people know that we've been running lean and mean here at the City of Lacey really ever since our recession. And we have not been really backfilling a lot of those positions, and we continue to grow. And so we're finally at this point where we need to add some more full-time positions. And so there was a recommendation to look at some staff, some requirements, and of course they weren't budgeted. That's why it's coming for us now. And so that was explained to us what positions are needed, what the cost is going to be to the budget. It's about $225,000, and we agreed to forward that on to council for the next budget amendment cycle for approval. Then we talked about House Bill 1406, which is the affordable and supportive housing. This is a recently passed through the state legislature, and what it says is that a portion of the city's of the state's sales tax that a city collects can be set aside for affordable housing and supportive housing purposes under this new ordinance. But we have to be able to, we have 6 months after legislation passed to sign the ordinance, and 12 months after legislation was enacted to start collecting that state's portion if we agree to do that. And so this isn't a new sales tax. It says on my report, enact an ordinance imposing the sales tax. This is actually, it's not imposing a new sales tax. It's really taking a portion of the state sales tax from our city and holding that back for this purpose. So, yeah. So anyway, we all agreed that we should do that as soon as possible. What I've suggested, and I've talked to the other mayors about, and at least have hinted at this, is that City of Lacey's portion of this for a year, based on our sales tax collection, is not a ton of money. It's like $95,000. Of course, the City of Olympia, luckily they have the Auto Mall and a lot more retail sales tax, so their portion is a little bit more than, double ours actually. But that's still not a lot of money. But you throw in Tumwater and the rest of the county, which we could do, that now we're talking about a sizable sum, and it'd be nice if there was an interlocal agreement where we could start purchasing property for affordable housing to start that process and really build up our affordable housing stock. And if we did it countywide and we all work together, we could really make a difference. If we do it all on our own, it's not a lot of money, and it's pennies when we need more than dollars. So I think we will need to continue to talk to our counterparts and the other jurisdictions in Thurston County and see if we can come up with a plan or an interlocal agreement, and we can go from there. And that's my report. Next up is the General Government and Public Safety Committee.
So the General Government and Public Safety Committee met May 28th, and we had 2 items, one of which we just passed today, this evening, the Affordable Housing Fee Waiver Policy Update, and the other is the City Council Travel Budget Amendment request by our newest council member, Zeman, and it was moved on without a recommendation for discussion here. And one of the reasons is that in March, all of us submitted what our travel budget was expected to be, and then that was divided up. And so we would need an amendment to come up with the request. And a couple items are for the essentials for new council members, which is a webinar, and a couple others, but the Association of Washington Cities Conference is coming up, and that's a cost. So I guess...
is there a motion that needs to take place on this?
We need a motion, and
yeah, so
yes.
it's presented as General Government Committee agreed to forward to the full council without a recommendation. It's your privilege to have this discussion and make a final decision on that request.
And I think this was passed out to everyone. 10.02 is our travel and training budget information if you need it. And so if there's a motion,
So
I could make the motion.
The one question we have, which we weren't quite sure of, is does Councilmember Seaman get to vote on this motion or not?
Right.
So, and the answer is yes. All council members can vote on this. I think the concern is whether or not it's a conflict of interest, and it's not it's obviously an interesting question, which is why the mayor asks it.
Right.
It's not a personal gain. It's the decision is whether or not the travel budget for the council, that a particular council member might receive the benefit of that as a council member, but it's not as an individual person. And I think if the council wanted to refrain from that, then the correct motion would be for or future action could be for the policy to be amended, indicating that that council member shouldn't take part.
Just clarification, I'm a little confused because I thought what we were looking at, the amendment, was very specific to the money for a specific council member. This wasn't a change to the policy. I understand if it was a change to the policy, we'd all vote, but I'm not quite sure how it makes sense that the person, that it's not about personal for that one person. How do they?
A council member would be afforded the opportunity to attend additional training, but I guess the distinction is that it would be the council member. It's an interesting question for sure. It's akin to a council member moving for any number of things where they, as a council member, might receive the benefit, and perhaps it's to add a particular item to the agenda. The council as a whole is going to vote on that, and it passes or it fails. That doesn't mean every council member has to vote. It's just my interpretation of whether or not it's a conflict of interest. I don't think it is.
The one thing that I need to make sure is clear is that staff confirmed that if council members fulfill their current travel expenditures, the budget with this amendment is likely to be overspent. So you would have to have an amendment to increase it.
So the motion is,
Well, there isn't a motion.
you're right.
To speak as to whether or not I will vote on this issue, and in regards to being fair to all concerned, I would abstain from this vote. Although it is, I believe, for the best of the entire council, that all council members function at an equal level of understanding of their position, which they are honored to hold.
So
I would make a motion to approve the travel budget amendment. Does that satisfy?
And I'll second it. Discussion.
So this kind of example kind of goes into my previous concerns about the travel budget, vis-a-vis, benefiting the city, the citizens, the council member, and/or the individual. And so I wish we had a policy that maybe split that up. I know a private sector self-improvement events were often split or whatever, but this request here is asking for consistency on the existing ordinance that we have, so I'll be approving it.
Yes.
So I'll bring up the same concern that I brought up at the committee meeting, and that is that, as we went through the process, the appointment process, one of the concerns of some members of the council, discussed at pretty great length, was the idea that it is a temporary position until the elections are held in November. With that, I have some issues with the idea of us spending additional money that's not already budgeted for sending a council member, a new appointed council member, to a conference when their term literally ends in November unless they, are elected successfully. I fully support the idea, and I don't know if this would have to be done as an amendment or how we would do this, but and I forget exactly the title of it, but the essentials, the webinar, I think that's important for anyone sitting on the council to understand the function, to understand the job at hand so that they understand it and are able to do it properly. So I would support that piece, but I don't believe that attending the AWC conference is necessary on an appointed position.
Carolyn is first.
Councilmember Cox?
Okay. First of all, I do back training for Councilmember Zeman. I think it's really important, and we're expecting her to be a fully functioning council member until the end of the year and possibly beyond, so I think it's a good investment. But I have a question. We had money in the budget for Councilmember Young, so wouldn't that money just roll over to that position?
So the process was, you're right, if Councilmember Young bypassed her selections at the beginning of the year. And so how this process goes, and it's a new process, by end of March, we all decide,
Right.
we all have the equal opportunity to go to two conferences.
Right.
At that point, it opens up the rest of the budget for other council members. This was a unique circumstance because Councilmember Zeman wasn't on council at the time and missed that whole process.
Right.
And so now that money has been designated for other council members, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
And so, but now, so we're having to go back and say, she missed the opportunity. We would need to now forward it back to her.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. Councilmember Stedman.
Okay, I could be totally wrong here. I'm just going off memory. But in the past, there's been several appointed council members who have traveled to said conferences after being appointed. I don't want to say any names or anything like that.
Yeah,
but
you might be correct.
I believe one was even mayor at the time. But regardless, it's happened before. There's no difference in happening in the future or it's everything needs to be treated fairly, past, present, and future.
Okay. Councilmember.
I'm going to change my position on this for three reasons. Number one, Councilmember Greenstein's comment that this was an appointed position. Number two, Councilmember Cox. Councilmember Cox's reminder that this position was replacing Councilmember Young's position, and therefore should probably accept that budget. Number three, it's an increased budget, so maybe if Councilmember Zeman should go, whoever took Councilmember Young's money should give it back. So I'm going to decline on this one.
Okay. Okay.
So the budget, as is right now, based on what is potential, the budget would be spent. Some of that was, and I was unsure at the time whether I was going to a particular conference in, I believe, San Antonio. So if I were to not go, if I wound up not going to that conference, that money frees up. That would then not require a budget amendment.
Yep.
So being that that decision's not been made, how would that be handled? How
So
could
we won't make
do
the
that?
budget decision until we've spent the entire budget, and then we would need to do a budget decision.
So I guess what I'm getting at, though, I guess, and this is really my question is, I'm not sure how to pose it exactly to be clear. So if I go, obviously we've used up that portion of the budget. If I wind up not going to that conference and say Councilmember Zeman goes to this conference, would she be able to be reimbursed then? Because there would still be money in the budget. We wouldn't be a budget amendment.
So I guess I'd answer in the sense, if you decided to say the 3,000 would go back to the general good of the council, we still have unfinished business with travel. It would be closer to meeting that request and essentially be making a motion or an amendment to allocate your portion to allow Councilmember Zeman to go to the conference in Spokane and basically a $1,200 request.
Which would then just happen later, in other words.
Right.
So in that case, what would happen is Councilmember Zeman would have to basically lay it out at this point, and then would be able to get it back if there were money left in the budget.
Right, but I'd almost make it as, just make it an amendment to the March request for travel. So you're basically, we'd have to redo the math to make sure there was enough money to do that slate of travel that council agreed to. Because as the estimates were done, it was very close to $24,000-$25,000.
Let me simplify it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be going to the conference in San Antonio. So that money will come back into the budget. My issue with this that I brought up at the conference is I was not in support of this because I don't want to put additional budget money because I don't think it's appropriate in someone who is a very short-term member of this council unless elected in November. But there is going to be, the money is going to be available because I'm not going to be able to make that San Antonio conference. So, and none of that money's been spent yet.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. How would we make that happen?
And I agree, and I just think there's a higher probability a budget amendment would not be necessary, but I don't have all the receipts in for all the future travel for the remainder of the year. So I don't want to say, yes, you're good, because once the final receipts come in, you may still need a budget amendment to cover the additional. It's going to be a lot lower, obviously, because you're no longer going to commit the $3,000.
Right. So I guess just one more question on that, because I want to make sure I'm understanding this before we take a vote on this. If I were to vote no here today, because as it stands, that is my position, but if in fact at the time the money is available, can Councilmember Zeman be reimbursed? Because I would want her to be able to if the money is there in the budget.
So let me answer it this way.
I'm sorry.
If council as a body agrees, in a sense, you're still authorizing Councilmember Zeman to go to the conference. I think that authority then would allow her to attend the conference, and then we would then allocate the remaining money over for that, and then see where we're at the end of the year. And we can give you updates as that travel commitment comes in. And I don't mean to be hesitant, I can't calculate all the future travel commitments.
I understand.
Yeah.
So another comment?
So, but to kind of get to your question, if you want to authorize that, I think it's a decision of council for that travel.
But that would be a future decision. That wouldn't,
Or
this
it
decision.
could, or it could happen now.
But I'm saying, but even if we didn't do it now, it could still happen at a future time. So I could vote no today, and they could still, if there's money left in the budget, allow for that money to be spent.
You could. I'll
That
say
sounds
right
really
now, we're not going to spend the entire travel budget. I know it's not going to happen. We're under what we expected. I was able to get my flight reimbursed by NLC on something. We're going to be under. If you're not going for sure,
I'm not.
we're going to be under. I mean, there's not going to be. We're not going to need to do it. He's being judicious here, but
I guess then why, if we're not going to be there, why do we need to vote on this at all?
because we still have to give her the authority because we haven't given her the authority to go to anything yet.
Why does she need authority to go?
Yes.
Spending her own money and then seeking reimbursement. I don't understand why any
This
authority
one,
would be
no, the
necessary.
policy changed. The policy says that each council member is allowed to go to 2 conferences. In this circumstance, she wasn't available at the time, so we need to come back and give her the authority since she missed the original deadline. Because she wasn't on the council at the
So
time.
she needs authority, and that has nothing to do with money,
She missed authority in
And,
March.
and to, yeah, and to pay,
She needs to have it.
and to pay for it.
and to pay for it.
Because when this ordinance came about in these previous discussions, I felt pretty strongly that, okay, that just means the budget's going to go up
Yeah.
at some
And-
point. And I'd be surprised, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I will be surprised if we don't have an increased budget because of this.
It's not
The problem
going to
is still that
increase.
I can't support this without knowing whether the money's in the budget or not. That's where I'm having,
yeah.
that's where my conflict is.
If you're not going to go and you're giving $3,000 back,
Understood, the money's going to be there.
it's going to be there because she's only requesting, it's going to be $1,200.
So this is moot.
Yeah.
So
Still not seeing the
So could you repeat the motion, please?
the motion is to,
Approve the travel budget.
through the travel
amendment.
budget request for Councilmember Zeman to attend the
Association
available
of-
webinars, which is the AWC's Elected Officials Essentials webinar, the AWC's Affordable Housing and Homelessness Series for a total of $190, and the AWC Conference member cost, which is a conference budget request of $1,000.
And I'll just state, it's great to have unanimous consent of the whole council, but it's not necessary. It's okay that we have a no
You're
vote.
saying call the question.
It's okay.
Is that what you're
No,
saying?
we
No.
don't call the question. We'll
No.
have to vote on that.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Well,
is there
it's
any
been
other
called a vote.
discussion? Is there any other discussion?
Just one other statement. There are multiple concurrent sessions, and currently only Deputy Mayor Pratt is going to this conference. And if we would like to take part in the wealth of knowledge that is provided at this conference, you would need more than one representative to be available.
Councilmember Cox, you're not going? I thought you were going.
I am going.
Oh, forgive
Oh,
me,
so there you
Councilmember
go.
Cox is going as well.
Okay.
But there are 4 concurrent sessions
Okay.
going on.
Thanks for the update.
Yeah.
And mine is paid for because I'm on the board,
Yeah,
so.
so it has been moved and it has been seconded to adopt this council member request. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Opposed.
The request has been granted. Thank you. You know what? Before we go into
Land use.
boards, commissions, and committee reports, I would suggest that we move that to our next council meeting, and because we can still need to adjourn to a work session tonight.
Second.
But okay, but don't forget land use.
What are we moving?
You're right. We need to do land use. We need to do land use next.
Okay.
Sorry. After land use, let's do that.
So
Yeah.
what you're looking at is to not do committee reports.
Committee
Yeah,
reports
do
at
it
the
next-
time.
Right.
Next council meeting.
Yeah. Move them.
Well,
Let's do land use, and I'll make that motion.
I would really like to give my report
Yep.
tonight, if I may.
Oh,
So could you allow me to do mine?
well, let's discuss that after we do land use.
Okay. Well, two of the items that land use heard from, we actually voted on tonight, the wireless code and the capital facilities plan. We had briefings from Jess on that. We also had a presentation from Olympia Community Solar, Mason Rolfe and Jasmine McLean. And they talked about the opportunities. They've actually identified 2 locations in Lacey that could potentially be the site of a community solar system project. So I'm very interested in keeping that conversation going as we look at our investments in non-polluting energy. And I hope we can continue that conversation. And then quickly, we also had a briefing about the Planning Commission hearing that occurred 2.5 weeks ago now. Eddie Bishop from the Planning Commission is here, and he had quite a night there. But basically, I thought the staff, Rick and crew, did a really nice job of analyzing the comments, which were largely negative, but what people were concerned about and the like. And I think that information is available for full council if anybody else is interested in exploring it. And that's-
Did you mention what it was, the emergency housing facilities briefing?
You're talking about,
I think you forgot the title, but I may be wrong.
Or the
Yes, it was the public hearing for the emergency housing ordinance that the planning commission is currently working on.
Right.
sorry.
Oh, great.
Just one quick comment on that. I just agree with Carolyn. The presentation we had from Olympia Community Solar presentation was excellent. Really good presentation, and something that I think we should put a little more effort into looking into further, because I really thought he had some great ideas that could come into play and be useful here.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Is that the end of your report?
The end of my report.
Great. So, you have a,
I
I-
could abbreviate, and
Okay.
I would ask the council for 60 seconds.
okay, so I would move that after Councilmember Hearn does a quick update on one of his committee reports, that we do the rest of our committee reports next council meeting, and that will adjourn to our work
I
session.
want to clarify, I would request 60 seconds, but to be fair, they're not related to my committee reports.
Okay,
60 seconds of council time.
okay. Any discussion?
I'll second it, but only if we can take 60 seconds back from him at our next meeting.
You bet.
Okay. Well, it's been, do we need a formal motion to do that, or can it just net it? It's my prerogative?
You already have a
Yeah.
motion on the table anyway.
Okay.
You have a first and.
Okay.
you
All
have
in
a
favor of that
second.
motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay,
Okay, time
Councilmember
me
Hearn.
60 seconds. I want to acknowledge and respect that this council has an ordinance right now that raises the Ms. Maciejewski flag at an appropriate time, and also a special interest flag during the month of June. That said, during that discussion, I either missed it or forgot, and became really surprised and disheartened when I came to City Hall and our Lacey flag is gone, the one that represents all citizens of Lacey. So I would just ask, in my last 20 seconds here, over the next days and weeks, if this council could consider maybe ways that we could add a flag or share a pole so that we could have the proud Lacey flag once again above our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to adjourn to a work session. So
How much time?
thank you for everyone hanging in there. And look, a couple of people are still here. And so I'm going to adjourn to this work session. As always, keep it classy, Lacey, and we'll see you next time.